أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واذكر في الكتاب مريم إذ انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا فاتخذت من دونهم حجابا فأرسلنا إليها روحنا فتمثل لها بشرا سويا قالت إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا قال إنما أنا رسول لربك لأهب لك غلاما زكيا قالت أنى يكون لي غلام ولم يمسسني بشر ولم أك بغيا قال كذلك قال ربك هو علي حيا ولنجعله آية للناس ورحمة منا وكان أمرا مقضيا. صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, relate in the book the story of Mary when she withdrew from her family to a place in the east. She placed a screen to screen herself from them. Then we sent to her our angel, and he appeared before her as a man in all respects. She said, I seek refuge from thee to Allah most gracious. Come not near me if thou dost fear Allah. He said, Nay, I am only a messenger from thy Lord to announce to thee the gift of a pure son. She said, How shall I have a son, seeing that no man has touched me, and I am not unchaste? He said, So it will be. Thy Lord saith, That is easy for me, and we wish to appoint him as a sign unto men and a mercy from us. It is a matter so decreed. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to our channel. So I wanted to talk about a very controversial subject, and that is the subject of European nationalism vis-a-vis Islam, Muslims, both in the West and in the Muslim world. But I want to give a few caveats before I do. So first of all, Islam for Europeans is an apolitical organization. So we don't advocate for any particular political party or political position. We don't consider ourselves right. If you can take a look at the time to look at our declaration, which I'll put down in the description. But basically, our position on Muslims living in the West or any other non-Muslim country for that matter is that when giving dawah, you need to take a quote unquote communitarian approach. And that means is that you need to realize that you as a Muslim coming to a non-Muslim country, your culture has had centuries to adapt this cultural synthesis of your culture, your urf, within Islam. And that is a wonderful thing. Your parents are Muslim, your grandparents are Muslim, your ancestors are Muslim. You've incorporated, Islamic terms into your vernacular. You've incorporated the dress, the cuisine, the architecture. And we, as Islam for Europeans, we don't think that you should lose sight on that. However, you need to realize that for those who are converting to Islam, especially ones who've had whose history has been negative between Islam and their people, you need to give them the space and like the breathing room to collectivize and form a wolf pack, and that way they can form their own cultural synthesis of Islam within their culture. So they're getting rid of the bad things and keeping the good, and their family and community members need to see this at the group level. So what this does is that when someone converts to Islam from that group, they have someone they can take them in that understands the culture, the lingo, and is willing to talk to their non-Muslim friends and family, so that they can allay their fears. And with this on-the-ground approach, this is the best way to lower Islamophobia or anti-Islam sentiment in the Anglosphere and any other non-Muslim country that you're in. And Muslims are quickly finding out that this model works far better, that it's exponentially better than the Medina model that we've been preaching, because people convert to Islam in groups, and people see that Islam doesn't erase one's cultural identity. Okay, so and when you take this model to Europe proper, the fear is that if we give European Muslims a foothold, then they're going to use this as as sort of a way to grift and kick Muslims out of Europe, because you're basically sucking up to the European right, and that's not true. because when someone from European descent converts to Islam, they get an incredibly negative reaction from their family and community members. If they belong to a far-right organization, they will most certainly be kicked out. And what's left is that they have no chance but to assimilate into an existent Muslim subcommunity. So even though we're an apolitical organization, the way we look at this approach vis-a-vis, the European right-wing political parties, we feel that if Muslims were to implement this approach, they should use it as a bargaining chip. Basically saying, look, we know that the European birth rates have gone down dramatically, and that Europeans are afraid of losing their culture. There are many different cultures, depending on what country they're in. So Islam can actually help with this if we take this communitarian approach to different Muslim subcommunities, right? But what we want in return is the safety and security of all Muslims, living in the West and abroad. So that's one thing. And B, the restabilization of the Muslim and African world so that there's less of a need for Muslims and people who've been oppressed by those nations to come to Europe in the first place. And, when you look at the success of a politician like Meloni in Italy, she's kind of using this angle, even though she said some things that are kind of anti-Islam, in that the whole reason why this refugee crisis has been precipitated is that the neoconservative invasions in the early 2000s of Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting puppet dictators, European governments supporting puppet dictators in the Middle East and Africa, and exploitation of those countries and their resources. And she frames it within this way, and it's a much more humanitarian approach to addressing the issue. But there's still like this kind of anti-Islam sentiment, which there's always going to be, between Muslims and Europeans, right? But for those who don't really know, because this is not really mainstream information, there's a schism that exists in the European right. So the first and the more visible part of the European right is the anti-Islam right. Usually mostly comprised of Christians, but also atheists, agnostics. And these are the people that you actually see, in the public sphere, in social media. Those are the ones that get the book deals. They're supported by the right, and they're able to exist without getting deplatformed usually. So these are your Douglas Murrays, your Tommy Robinsons, even Jordan Peterson. I guess you could say he's like a center-right modernist. But these are the people who are kind of pushed out into the forefront as the voices for the right. Right. So that's one schism of the European right, and that is the only faction of the right that mainstream Muslims, especially Muslim influencers, actually see. Right. So they're pushed in the forefront, and you can tack on the specifically anti-Islam preachers like your Robert Spencers and your David Woods and things like that. And they take a very pro-Zionist stance, pro-neoconservative stance, modernist stance. They're pro-liberalism, and all the things that irk the Muslim community, and rightly so, because it's all of like the things that really dig and annoy our existent Muslim communities living in the West. There's another faction on the right that has been mostly completely deplatformed. This faction of the right, their attitudes towards Islam range from neutral to even slightly positive. You have an appreciation for the fact that for Muslim civilization. They are have kind of anti-liberal positions. They're against feminism. They're against their children being taught things that are anti-traditionalist or against their Christian religion. Right. So this group does exist, but the problem is they've been all deplatformed for the most part, so they're very almost invisible, and they have to really watch what they say to keep any type of platform on YouTube. So they exist kind of like in the corners of the internet, like Odyssey and BitChute. They're not going to get the huge book deals, right? And they would be a lot of times these people aren't even willing to talk to Muslims because they've already explained their positions, and they don't really. Even if they were to talk to Muslims, they would lose a lot of their fan base. That's another thing too, right? And the problem with Muslims wanting when they actually find this group of this faction of the European right, because you can call it sometimes a dissident right, they don't want to talk to them either because A, there's a chance that they may get deplatformed themselves. B, they talk about really controversial subjects. And C, it kind of just feeds into this whole narrative that if you give the right an inch, they will take a mile. And at the end of the day, even though they disagree strongly with the anti-Islam right, vis-a-vis liberalism, things like liberalism, the sticking point is immigration of people from Muslim countries and African countries, to the West, right? But their beef is not so much that Islam is going to become a larger and larger religion and become a greater percentage of the population per se. Among the dissident right, it's the idea that they're going to be that their culture is basically dying out, and that these cultures that existed within Europe for thousands of years, within a century, are just going to become a tiny hated minority. Right. So I can understand why Muslims don't want to give the right any traction, even though we agree on things like liberalism and things like that, because the fear is if any right-wing party gains power, then a couple of things are going to happen. One is that it's going to give carte blanche to people to attack masjids or mosques. Go in, the tragedy of Christchurch might happen again. It'll give, the Europeans more, I guess, leeway to attack Muslims on the street, because there's not this protection of state power that we have currently, with the current government apparati that strongly enforce anti-Islam attacks, and so on and so forth. So that's why it appears as though Muslims don't want to, at the end of the day, fight what's right, because it will lead to their own destruction. And conversely, a lot of people on the European right don't want to reach out to Muslims either, because it's just the same type of mentality. If we give them an inch, then they'll take a mile. If we agree with Muslims on, say, liberalism, or like agree with Muslims existing in Europe, it'll just it won't stop the flow. It's going to make things even worse for us, and it's going to be suicidal, basically. Right. So that's the dilemma that one struggle is basically faced with, right? So it's a pretty crazy situation, and no one wants to address it. No one wants to talk about it, because this kind of this. It's a non-zero sum game. Coming to agreement on certain things, but at the end of the day, once one group takes power, it's going to result in a lot of conflict. Right. So I guess at the end of the day, both sides have to think about what kind of world we want to live in, and what we're willing to do, to achieve that, and what we're willing to sacrifice, without it leading to violence or conflict. And that's something that I would like to see. But me, I'm just giving my commentary. I'm not, don't want to lead this type of group. What we can do is at least, give our nasiha, our consultation, to both sides, because I think that there are solutions that we have to think outside of the box, right? So first and foremost, I mean, when you frame the refugee crisis in terms of the fact that it's extremely expensive, astronomically expensive, currently in 2023, to bring refugees to Europe. Right now in the UK, they're being put up in 5-star hotels. It's costing the British government 1.3 billion quid to keep them there. Where in the meantime, we have hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters in Turkey and Syria and Jordan who are living on shoestring budgets. I mean, they're living in refugee camps. They need money. They need support. And it's far cheaper to help hundreds of thousands of Muslims living there than the hundreds of people who are living, in the UK who just came there illegally. And we don't even know if they're all Muslim. I mean, or even practicing Muslims. So that's one way that we have to look at it. A lot of these Muslims also, they die en route to Europe as well. If you look at it dispassionately, if there were no right-wing parties pushing this kind of anti-Islam sentiment, anyone with a rational mind would think it's a lot better for these Muslim refugees to be helped in Muslim countries again, and their kids are not going to be influenced by liberalism. A lot of these Muslims who come to the West, tragically, their kids end up leaving Islam. They have really high apostasy rates, and no one really wants to talk about these facts. But at the same time, I can understand where Muslims are coming from because A, they don't understand that there is this faction on the right that has positive attitudes towards Islam. And B, no one has really proposed this kind of idea, where, we have something to offer, but in return that we should get something else. And that would be, the safety and security of Muslims living currently, in the West. And that's what we're proposing. If Muslims at the ground level would say for mosques to develop this communitarian approach to the Dawah, where European converts to Islam keep their cultural identity by forming a subcommunity in the same way that African American Muslims and Latino Muslims have done in the States and Zul Muslims have done in Mexico, then they can develop this cultural synthesis vis-a-vis Islam. And then you would see that, like for example, if people in Bucharest converted to Islam in Romania, there would be an Islam for European center, and they could go there, and the Muslim community can refer them there. And they say, look, your people the best, and these Romanian converts, they will help you out. They'll help you, talk to your family and help you get acclimated to the Romanian Muslim subcommunity. But to quote Heath Ledger from The Dark Knight, if you're good at something, don't do it for free. So, the Muslims living in Europe, they can say, we can do this, but we want a trade-off. We want the safety and security of Muslims living in the West, in exchange for a moratorium on current immigration of Muslims to Europe proper. Okay, with exceptions, of course, like for example, like reunification of families and whatnot. And on top of that, you advocate and say, look, we want the restabilization also of the Muslim world. Like the previous governments in the West have had really disastrous policies for Muslim countries and countries in Africa. They've been exploiting their resources, they've been invading their countries, they've been supporting puppet dictators, and nobody likes this setup. And once you create like a safe environment, a lot of Muslims will naturally, without any forcing, will want to, move to make hijrah to a country where they can, practice their religion freely. But the controversial thing about that is that, whenever you say this, people think you have some ulterior motive that, you believe in enforced repatriation. I don't believe in that. I don't think people should be forced to move from one place to the other. Yeah, and then in exchange, the anti-Islam laws that currently in places like France would be rolled back, and the return to traditionalism, no matter what that tradition is. We as Muslims, we believe that we have the truth, but if people are going back to Christianity, I mean, we can't stop them from that. I mean, you can't force Islam on people. So like these things are the same. Just as we don't want safety and security of Muslims living in Europe, if people want to practice their Christian religion, we shouldn't be able to stop them from that. The la ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion, right? And that brings to the final thing, which is some people from Muslim backgrounds do commit crimes towards the native European populations. We're completely opposed to that as well. We should be as Muslims. I mean, it's really unacceptable behavior. These people are not war booty. You're living as a Muslim in the West, like to give alcohol, to non-Muslims, especially non-Muslims of the opposite gender, and groom them and have relations with them. This is completely unacceptable in Islam. This is completely, there's no way that a Muslim could, justify this. And a lot of, the YouTube Dawah people who have large accounts, they've said this themselves. In principle, we're completely opposed to this idea. This whole like thing like grooming gangs. Ali Dawah said it in his discussion with Lawrence Southern. Daniel said it in his discussion with Mark and Jean Francois. It's just that they don't make it part of their thumbnails usually because it's not really something that they need to explain all the time. And I think that's why a lot of Muslims got fatigued from trying to explain their religion to white people, and this is completely understandable when you're dealing with the anti-Islam right all the time. And in addition, there's some white Europeans that commit crimes against Muslims. I mean, those people should be punished to the fullest extent of the law as well. But I think the whole idea of a European Muslim identity or identities, just as we would advocate for the same thing in Japan, is an outside the box solution that I think no one is looking at, because the dissident right would agree with it. They say, hey, we have no problem with that. If you want to, if groups of Europeans want to convert to Islam, keep everything that's good in their culture, their food, cuisine, architecture, sports and games, and just get rid of the degenerate aspects in their culture. We have no problem with that. If the Muslims would support something like that, that would, thumbs up to them. So the idea is intriguing and to them, but since the big Muslim accounts don't realize that this group exists, they've only been dealing with the anti-Islam right. I can understand why they haven't thought of this as an outside the box solution. Right. So that's basically my consultation to the big Muslim YouTube accounts, to my fellow European descendant converts. The idea that we're giving up on our people and saying that they're irredeemably evil, in an attempt to try to fit in with the Muslim communities, that is just making it worse for them. It's giving it a horrible impression on the Dawah, and I can't see any positives in that. I mean, I can understand why non-European Muslims think that way. Like they don't interact with the Anglosphere very much, and they hear a lot of anti-Islam stuff coming out of social media, and they get attacked on the street for being visibly Muslim. So they're just the anger, resentment, fear towards Europeans and white people is totally understandable. But even them, like when we explain to them the whole idea of like this kind of cultural synthesis of European cultures within Islam, they think it's a wonderful idea. So that's, I think, is a big missing piece of the puzzle that needs to be integrated before we can any of these types of discussions with the right. Okay. Yeah, so that's my time for the day. And please like and subscribe to Islam for Europeans. Let me know what you think in the chat. But that's it. That's all I have to say. And hopefully, I don't get canceled after I make this video. But like what I've said is completely in line with Islam. I'm not advocating for any violence or hatred towards our Muslim brothers and sisters. In fact, it's the opposite. I think the way we're headed as a Muslim community and the way we're approaching this very complicated problem is exponentially increasing anger, anti-Islam sentiment in the Anglosphere. And I mean, it's where we're headed right now. It's really bad, and I think we need to take a look at alternative approaches, because neither the Medina model of this whole we're all Muslims, let's get rid of any cultural identities, we're all one people, that hasn't worked. But at least it's better than the current Marxist approach, which basically said that, like, the West is evil, there's nothing redeemable about it, there's no way we can bargain with these people. That's even more destructive. And this is an alternative model that we're looking at, and this is our recommendations to the greater Muslim community. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.